Alright, TRT Final Lab Practical. The first thing we're going to go over is starting with priority 2 because that's where we start in the protocol. And we also just note this isn't a TRT table, we'd have the wedge underneath their feet. So we're going to start by making sure they're centered on the table and that their feet are landing right in the middle of the table as well. And we're going to do a functional leg check. Activating Achilles tendon, we're going to look for a side short leg. Looking at this part of the shoe. So say we have this as her short leg. I'd say turn your face to this side. Good. And say that balanced it. That would be a positive for a Raman test. So I'll go up and pressure test. Lateral to medial on C1. And her short leg would balance out if that was positive. We'd come up and we'd adjust this straight lateral to medial. Sorry, first we try torque, clockwise, counterclockwise, whatever balances the legs perfectly. Then we'd come straight lateral to medial and we'd provide the motion as well. Alright, the next option would be that if, again, her right leg is her short leg, turn your face to the left. If that balanced it, go back to center, we're thinking that it is a cervical syndrome. So the first thing that we test with the cervical syndrome is C1 for posterior rotation on the side of short leg. So I'd come up and my contact point for that previous one was the TP. Now I'm posterior to the TP of C1 and I'll pressure test there. And if that balanced it, then I would come up and check torque, right or left torque, and whatever balanced it perfectly. And then our line of drive on this is posterior to anterior on the posterior aspect of the TP of C1. And again, motion and adjust. Say that on that bilateral cervical syndrome, the C1 did not balance the legs perfectly. I would come up and pressure test C5 on the posterior transverse process. Down and check the legs. That balanced it perfectly. I'd come up to C5 and I would check the clockwise and counterclockwise torque. Whatever one balanced it perfectly. I'm coming to the posterior aspect of the TP of C5 and I'm going straight posterior to anterior with motion. Alright, the last option of priority 2 is a bilateral cervical syndrome. So what will happen with that is I would get my side of short leg, right. She'd turn her face to the right and short leg would go long. Then she'd turn her face to the left, sorry, and it would switch. So short leg is switching back and forth between long and short. So we're going to go first to occiput, find the EOP, just inferior to it, pressure test there, come back. If that's perfectly balanced, then we would go up and check torque, clockwise or counterclockwise torque. Whatever one perfectly balanced it, we're coming in under EOP, and we're going P to A, but I to S, and having some motion in there. Second option in bilateral cervical syndrome, if that occiput was not there, then we would check for the coccyx sphenoid. So I'd pressure test coccyx. I'm going to be touching your tailbone, okay? If that balanced it, then we would automatically go ahead and adjust coccyx if that was perfect. So what I do is I come in down on the sacral tubercles, find the coccyx. I'm going to do a tissue pull up on that coccyx before the tip. And my line of drive is coming straight inferior to superior on that. And my thumb is used there to hold the tissue. And that is going anterior to posterior, and inferior to superior. Automatically with the coccyx adjustment, I'm going to go to test sphenoid, and I test a pressure test with her head down. I would check this on the side of short leg, which we're using her right side. So I pressure test just 3/4 of an inch lateral to the lateral, or posterior to the lateral canthus. I would check the S to I to S, medial to lateral, lateral to medial, in the cardinal lines of drag. And wherever one perfectly balanced that, then I'd come up, I'd have her turn her head. Can you turn your head for me? I like to cover their eye with my hand, and then come in, say it was straight S to I line of drag, and I'd use my thumb to help trigger the instrument. Back down. If that was the adjustment made, we also would note that that would be your last adjustment of the day. The next one is going to be C5, that I would pressure test. So if occiput and coccyx sphenoid did not show up, then we would move to C5. And also just want to note on that coccyx sphenoid that there was no torque on the instrument. So now we come up and pressure test C5. Pressure test. See if the legs balance. If they balance perfectly, then we'll go and check torque, clockwise or counterclockwise. And the adjustment on this, would be posterior to anterior with a bit of inferior to superior, and the C5 TP, and we come like that. The next one that we would test would be a C1 for posterior and inferior, and we're going to come up to the tubercle, posterior tubercle of C1, pressure test there, check if the legs balance. If that was the one that came up, then we would check for torque, clockwise and counterclockwise, whatever one was perfectly balancing. We're going to come up P to A, I to S on the posterior tubercle of C1. Motion. Also, when I'm doing any of these cervical adjustments, we have her take a breath in and let it all the way out. The next one, if occiput, coccyx sphenoid, C5, C1 did not show up, we're going to move to T6. The inferior of T6 is transverse process. We would pressure test there. Come and check the legs. If that perfectly balanced, then we check torque, clockwise or counterclockwise. And we're going P to A, I to S on the inferior aspect of the T6 spinous process. The last one would be C1 lateral, which we already showed. So again, come up, pressure test straight lateral to medial. If that balanced the legs, check the torque. And we're coming straight lateral to medial. This time we're back on to that transverse process of C1 with motion and a breath in.